great books to talk about in this video from several different genres. We've got historical fiction, literary fiction, urban fantasy, a memoir. There's just a great mix in here. So if you're looking for your next read, you're sure to find something to add to your TBR in this video. I think I'm gonna go in order of my least enjoyable read to most enjoyable read in this video. There might be some that I would rank a little differently if I was doing a tier list or something, but for the most part, I feel confident about this order. First, I need to talk about my book of the month pick, The Women by Kristen Hanna. Now, I've read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. That was the first and only other book that I have read by that author. I generally enjoy my time with historical fiction, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily one of my favorite genres. Maybe the introduction or the expectation that there's romance involved, it just turns me off of it because I just believe that there's more to someone's story than their love life. I really like historical fiction where we're exploring people who were pioneers in a field, or they stood up for a cause that they believed in despite the times that they were living in or the popular beliefs at the time. I don't know, I just like historical fiction to have a little bit more relevance to history. I don't know if I articulated that clearly, but that's just something that I've noticed when I pick up historical fiction. I did like the prose. I think what she really excels at is setting up a scene. She really establishes the environment. She doesn't go overboard in describing it, but she does kind of initially establish that really well so that we can refer back to it when we're picturing the characters in each scene. Something that also contributes to the atmosphere in this book is that she mentions a lot of music. She mentions specific songs from the time of the war in Vietnam that our characters are hearing over the radio. Even when they return home from the war, some of those songs kind of are triggers, either of good memories or bad memories, and I think that music really does have that power. So it was really interesting to me to see Kristen use that as a device in this novel. I also really liked the intent of this book to highlight the untold stories of women who served during the Vietnam War. Something that gets repeated very often in this book is that there were no women in Vietnam. That was the overriding thought of the time, and the way that the media publicized things, they really kind of covered up the fact that there were women serving there. So in this story, we're following main character Frankie, who has decided to enlist in the army. Her family has a long-standing tradition of men who have served, and her dad has this wall in his office with all of their portraits. It's kind of like a wall of honor in their home. Her parents are giving a party in honor of her brother, who is going off to serve in the Vietnam War. Frankie feels that the only way for her to earn respect from her family, from her parents, from society, is to find a good match and to settle down. And she doesn't see that as a likelihood in her future. And so she decides to take her brother's route and enlist in the war effort. And she initially is turned down because she would need to have a certain amount of training in order to leave immediately, which is what she wants to do. She wants to follow shortly after her brother has left. The only branch of the military that will take her with very basic training is the army, because they are in desperate need of medical professionals. And so she goes off, she gets her basic training done. She's thrown into the real life dangers and drama of a mobile field hospital. But in this story, we get a very real picture of the fact that they are seeing wounded men coming in. There is death, there is suffering, there is pain that they cannot always address. If you've seen the show MASH, like that's kind of the situation that this novel is talking about, where there's a hospital that's set up that's technically not meant to stay there, but they are there because that's where the soldiers are being brought in to be cared for. There are helicopters going in and out with emergent medical needs. They have to be very sharp with their coordinating of who needs urgent attention, who is most likely not going to make it, and others that are gonna have to wait until their buddy is seen to before they can get care. The entire middle of the book is like this tense environment where our main character is living day by day and she's seeing so many traumatic things. And then the end of it is kind of her grappling with life afterward when people are not recognizing her contribution during wartime, and most people don't even believe that she is dealing with the same side effects and the same trauma that the men have come home with. Now, Frankie is quite a young character at the beginning of this story. She turns 21 when she is in Vietnam. A male character tells her women can be heroes too, and that is the inspiration that starts things moving in her brain, and she decides to go. And I kind of hated that. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are conversations in our lives that can spark us to make grand sweeping decisions, but that one just felt very unbelievable to me. The other thing that I disliked about this one is just you kind of see all the bad things that are going to happen to Frankie coming, and like she doesn't really miss any of the things coming her way. In camp, the other women kind of take her under their wing. One of the things they say is that you shouldn't be in a committed relationship, or don't start something with a man in Vietnam, because the soldiers here lie and die. They lie about being single when they have wives and children back at home, or they have a fiance waiting for them back at home, or they die. The likelihood of either of those is very high. So they kind of warn her off of that, and we know when we hear that, I think that something is going to happen. She's going to fall in love, and there's going to be betrayal, right? Like, I think any reader can tell, like, this is going to happen. She doesn't have a whole lot of discernment, so something is going to happen, and something does. I know that some people really love Kristen Hanna, and if there are any of her books that you think that I would enjoy that have some really great character growth, or they were just meaningful to you in general, please let me know in the comments. Even if I don't love a book, I know that other people could, and that's the magic of reading, is that there's something for everyone. Speaking of the magic of reading, the next book I want to talk about is The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. This book was a ride. I read it in one day. This is our urban fantasy. The story is set in present-day New York City, one of my favorite settings, and we're following the main character of Cassie, who works in a bookstore and cafe. She has a favorite customer who comes in very regularly. One day in the bookshop, Cassie leaves and then returns to find that this elderly man is slumped over the table, dead. Left on the table are two books, The Count of Monte Cristo and The Book of Doors. She opens the second book to find that there is an inscription that indicates that he planned to give the book to her as a gift. At the end of his note to her, it says, "Any door is every door." Later that night, after Cassie returns home, she discovers the meaning behind those ominous words. This book gives its holder the ability to open any door and travel to a different door of their own imagining. Cassie soon finds out that this book is a very priceless item, and it is being sought after by people of malicious intent. She's entered a world of intrigue and danger where there are book hunters and booksellers, and only one person who really is out to protect the books, who is the librarian. This would be a great book to pick up if you want something suspenseful and fast-paced. It really reminded me of a Marvel movie, at least the original ones, and there's a lot of connections made between things that happen in the past and the present. The other tie to that would be that there is some humor, there are some dark fight scenes. Again, nothing that you wouldn't see in a Marvel movie. We really get to travel with the characters in this book. A snowy night on a hotel rooftop in New York City, a misty morning with coffee and a buttery croissant in Paris. It's also got that element of descriptions you will really connect to if you love books and reading, but it doesn't overdo those. You can go overboard and feel like you're just reading about reading the entire time, but this really is an adventure story, and it kind of has those little pieces tucked into it in different places. Just like the bookstore, the house was full of books. No shelf was bare, no book alone and seeking company, but it was more than that. The house was full of warm corners and quiet places, pleasantly creaking floorboards and drafts of air coming from unseen gaps. The lighting was soft and the colors muted and warm, interrupted only by the vibrant shimmering green of the trees outside when glimpsed through passing windows. It was a building that welcomed people who wanted comfort and silence, who wanted space to contemplate and to think. It had an air of formality, but not stiffness, like a smartly dressed grandfather telling a rude joke. I really had a fun time with this one, and if it at all sounds interesting to you, I recommend that you give it a try. Next up, I have The Frozen River by Ariel Loudon. This is a historical fiction set in Maine, 1789. We're following main character Martha, who is a midwife in a small town. The story opens when a body is discovered underneath the ice, and she is called to examine the body and give her professional opinion as to what she believes to be the cause of death. There are a lot of injuries to assess. It's not immediately clear how he died, so she gives her opinion and kind of immediately pulled into this drama because there is a public figure in the town who is a suspect in this investigation, and it becomes a legal case. She's called on to testify, gets drawn more into this mystery, and she starts to put some pieces together on her own. There are members of her own family who are considered suspects, and she and her family kind of come under threat. This is a very intriguing story. It's mysterious. We go back and forth in time. She will reference something that happened like 35 years earlier, and we'll go back and we'll be with her during that time that she's referencing, and then go back to present day. So you do want to definitely pay attention to the chapter headings in this one, but I really like that element. I love our main character. She's smart, she's stubborn, she has this innate sense of justice, writes daily journal entries, even if they're very short, that tell about the patients that she's seen that day or things that she observed, and they are really what helps her to put the pieces together and solve this in the end. This book really sucked me in, and I can definitely second the thought that her marriage to Ephraim in this story and their family dynamic, their grown children, that was also an element that I really liked. I love seeing healthy, strong marriages depicted in literature, and this one has a really good one at the heart of it. She also is someone who has a personal faith, and it's not something that's overly examined, but it's still truly a piece of who she is, something that feeds her desire for justice. So I really like that as well. There are definitely some feminist themes in this one that are explored, and the ending of the book, shocking. It was really shocking. Definitely couldn't tell you what happens at the end because that would be an absolute spoiler. Look up the trigger warnings for this one if you have any concerns about the content. This was a fun read though. Definitely don't have to read it in winter just because it's set in winter. We still have the beginnings of spring taking place here as well, so it's not a time-bound story. Next, I want to talk about a literary fiction. This one is back in New York City, just like the Book of Doors, and it is Good Material by Dolly Allerton. This book is the story of a breakup. We're following 35-year-old Andy, who is a stand-up comedian who has to take a lot of side jobs, a lot of bad jobs, just to be able to eat. He has a lot of things that he wants out of life. To follow the tone of this book, I'm going to give you a list of the things that our main character, Andy, wants. Number 1. Reasons for why his long-term girlfriend left him. Number 2, a great marriage and kids like his friends Jane and Avi have. A fitter body without having to text his personal trainer a photo of his meal wins for each day. Guy friends who are capable of processing their emotions instead of just going on a supportive bender with him. A new direction for his career in stand-up. A callback from his talent agent. And 6, his life with Jen back. Andy is such a lovable character, and I really was rooting for him to find himself at home, both in a new place that was safe and okay because Jen kicked him out of their apartment when they broke up, and also at home in his own skin because he has a lot of insecurity and anxiety, and you just really hope that he feels okay with the person that he is by the end of the story. I've heard a few people say that this book had 2 different possible endings, but I feel like it's actually a little bit more closed than that. For almost the entire book, we're just following Andy, and then the very last piece of the book, we have a quick flash into Jen's perspective. I think it's pretty conclusively one ending, but we do get that extra level of context at the end. I've not read from Dolly Allerton before this book, and her writing is just so sharp and funny. I had a lot of laugh out loud moments when I was reading this one. I've had the chance to kind of soak in my thoughts and feelings about this one for a little bit. I think the whole theme of this book is really that the experiences in our lives, both good and bad, heartbreak and catastrophe, can eventually be something that we laugh at, and it can become good material. Be something that helps someone else laugh or have enough to persevere through their own difficulties, and I think that's what really makes this story. My disclaimer for this one would be that it does have adult language, and there are some topics that come up in this story and conversations that kind of surprised me, like they came out of nowhere. It is an adult book, and it does have some adult comedy, so that would be my disclaimer for this one. 2 books that I read because they are a duology, and those are A River Enchanted and A Fire Endless, both by Rebecca Ross. I don't know the name of this duology, but I read this after having read the Letters of Enchantment duology, so Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows. This one I actually liked even more. I'm not sure why. Maybe the setting of this one, it's got a very Celtic flavor to it. It's set on this island that is divided into clans. There is a line that no one is expected to cross, otherwise they could start a war. Both sides of the line have their own issues. One side has to pay a pretty terrible cost to their health when they make magical items. The other side is having a lot of struggles with getting the land to produce enough food to feed their people. And that's just above the surface, because we also have conflict happening with the spirits. There are elemental spirits and fairies in this world, and their conflicts are also interfering with the daily lives of these people. We start off following the main character of Jack, who has returned home from his time on the mainland studying music. He didn't really have any plans to stay back on his home island long term. He was just visiting his family. He's become aware of some problems that have been plaguing his family and the others on the island, and he realizes that he's one of the only people who is equipped to help, and so he might be there longer than he bargained for. One of the things that has enticed him to return and to actually step into that drama and that conflict is a childhood friendship with a character named Adara. And so this is a fantasy romance. There are some very similar themes to the Letters of Enchantment, even down to the fact that there is letter writing in here. You can kind of see Rebecca exploring the things that she continues to do in these 2 books. There might be some vague connections there. Maybe the mainland where he was studying music to begin with is the setting of Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows. I wasn't paying close enough attention. This setting and the plot is just very intricate because of everything that's happening in the fairy realm as well as in the human world. The romance element is just kind of like the whipped cream on top. It's not really the main thing, but it was still kind of nice. And I don't generally say that. Like, usually I want more adventure, but I feel like the relationships in this one, I like the magic system of this world. I think book 2 was actually my favorite because there were just a lot of jaw-dropping moments for me when I was reading it. There were things that the author did that I didn't see coming, and I was like, oh no. Like, I really did fear for the characters a little bit in book 2. Conversely to my experience with Letters of Enchantment, I think book 2 really made this duology for me. Like, it was a very solid ending. She took the time that she needed to be able to wrap up the threads of this story. The world building in book 1 was super solid, so I was ready in book 2. I already had like a clear visual of like the conflicts and what was at stake, and so I could relax into just the plot and the suspense of it all. Highly recommend, especially if you haven't read it and you started like me with Divine Rivals, check this one out next and let me know what you think. Coming down to the last two books, the first I want to talk about is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. I loved this book. It feels so much like Jane Austen. The way that the author captured her prose is amazing. It feels like Jane Austen just like threw this in the door of a time machine and it arrived in the 2000s. It's amazing, but there is a lot more examination of the characters. There is a little bit more depth in like the dialogue and the inner thoughts of the characters, which I liked. In this story, we're following perhaps the most overlooked of the Bennet sisters, and that is Mary Bennet. Mary has a very conservative yet intense personality that her witty, beautiful, and compulsive sisters do not. When most of her other sisters are settled into married life, Mary is feeling doomed to the fate of a spinster. She imagines herself being a governess, and that's really not what she wants out of life. But her friend Charlotte Lucas advises her, just take your next opportunity at marriage and shape the life you want within that marriage. Look only to your own security and fashion what you can from that. So when Longbourn is finally taken by Mr. Collins and he and Charlotte move in, Mary finds herself on a journey. She doesn't really have one home of her own, so she's visiting each of her sisters and she's kind of making notes along the way. She's making a personal study of what married life could be, from the Bingleys' people-pleasing ways to Darcy and Lizzie's exclusive passion to her aunt and uncle's very hospitable and bubbly life in the city. Mary begins to wonder if the possibility of a happy marriage is still something that exists for her. This book really takes its time. It opens ahead of the events that unfold in Pride and Prejudice, and then it carries on 2 years afterward. So we get a lot of time with Mary, we get a lot of time with her character development, seeing her change and break a lot of the patterns or false beliefs that she has clung to for so long, and I really appreciated that about it. My favorite thing about this book is just how much the prose reminds me of Jane Austen. I am really shocked that the author has not written like anything else since this book, because it's just so good. My one minor complaint about this, and it might just be this edition, but the print is so small. The character of this book had to get glasses because she was reading with poor lighting. She just really damaged her eyesight irreparably, so she had to get glasses. And the font in this book is tiny. What you gonna do? The last and probably the most moving book that I read so far this month is Mothership by Francesca Segal. This story opens with the birth of twins. Our main character goes into premature labor and her twin girls are delivered very, very tiny. And so they are hospitalized, and this details her day-to-day experience over the course of, I believe, 3 months or maybe 4 months, when they needed round-the-clock medical care and there was a roller coaster ride of, are they going to survive this or not? The way that she told her story is so engaging. It really pulls you in, not just because of what's at stake, because you are hoping that everyone makes it through this okay, but also just her sense of humor despite what she's going through, and the amazing like sisterhood of the other mothers that she met while she was there, and how they supported one another through this just awful circumstance. It really connected to me. It definitely makes you jealous for at least what was the healthcare system in the UK. I'm not sure if it's this good these days, but the fact that she was going through this traumatic experience and not a second did they have to worry about the bills that would arrive for them afterward. They didn't have to make a decision about mortgaging their house or taking a second job in order to pay for the care that was needed to keep their daughters alive. That's just not the case in America because our healthcare system is horribly, horribly broken. It's hard to read this and not compare it to the experiences of families in the United States, but there it is. I highly recommend this one. I'm not sure if there's an audiobook, maybe read by the author in her own voice. That could be cool, but I flew through this because it's just very compulsively readable. You really want to find out what happens next. The chapters are quite short, but her writing is just amazing, and I can't wait to read more of her books. I already have a couple of them ordered. This was the best of the books that I've read so far this month. I would give this 5 stars. I look forward to hearing from you. Let me know anything that you would recommend that you read recently, and if there were any of the books on this list that you plan to add to your TBR. I feel like I've been reading some really good ones lately, and I'm gonna continue to mood read. Thank you for giving this video a like, commenting if you have something you want to share, and subscribing if you want to stick around for more videos like this. And I will see you in another one soon.